Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second annual State of Education. Please enjoy the following message from our sponsor.
We connect people to the work they want. We connect companies to the people they need. But it's bigger than that, because when we connect people to work, we change their lives. We provide the foundation for people to create their own future, to discover what's next for themselves, their families, and their communities. We fuel growth, help build better futures, and change the way the world works.
Please welcome the president of Kelley Education, Nicola Suarez.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the Detroit Chamber's second State of the State of Education event. My name is Nicola Suarez, and as president of Kelley Education, I'm pleased to see so many professionals turn out for a topic that I'm very passionate about. As a former teacher myself, I often say education takes a village, and with all of us here together, we are that village. Hopefully, by now, we've all read the State of the State of Education report and are concerned about several findings, including an alarming racial achievement gap here in the Detroit area. I am beyond proud to share with you some news today we announced earlier this morning. We at Kelley Education believe that educational inequity starts during a student's formative years. And one way to reverse this trend is to increase the representation of diversity in our teaching workforce at the pre-K through 12 level. Right now, the majority of teachers, even in our urban districts, are white female. Today, we announced a new partnership with an organization called Teachers of Tomorrow, clearing the hurdles for those who choose to become a teacher, not as a traditional undergraduate in college, but post-degreed later in their career journeys. Our goal is not only to help rebuild America's teaching workforce, but to remove barriers in order to add more diverse teachers to our schools across the country, including Michigan. As you hear more about the Chamber's report in the next hour, which is a very comprehensive report, I encourage all of us to consider ways of building coalitions with other organizations and institutions so we can collectively make a difference in the future of education. After today's program, if you have any questions about how we can work together regarding workforce solutions or just want to connect, please find me on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Please welcome the president and CEO of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Sandy Barua.
Nicola, thank you so much for kicking off our program and for that terrific announcement about getting more equity in our teaching ranks in the region and across the country. We are so proud to partner with Kelley on this event, as well, along with our overall Chamber education and talent portfolio. As Nicola mentioned, the State of Education is our newest State of series, only in its second year. The rest of our State of series includes our State of the Region, which will be on February 25th, our Mish-Otto State of Automobility, which will be on March 24th, and just next week, on the 12th of February, we will feature Governor Whitmer for our annual State of the State address to the business community. And finally, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Since we can't be in person, thank you for joining us online and staying safe. But we also want to thank you for your overall commitment to the issues that are so important to our region, and that is advancing the issues of educational attainment and educational equity. None of this would be possible without our sponsors, and certainly our regional champion, as it has been for several years now, is of course Kelley. And I want to personally thank Kelley's CEO, Peter Quigley, Kelley's President of Education, Nicola Sora, who you just heard from, and the outgoing CEO of Kelley, George Corona, all who have played a key role in the Chamber's education and talent portfolio. I also want to acknowledge and thank our regional stakeholders for this event, Lake Michigan Credit Union and TCF. And I also want to note that we have students, actual students, participating in today's program, and that is thanks to our friends at University of Detroit Mercy and Independent Bank. So thank you all. Now, pulling this report together, especially on an annual basis, is a very large effort. And I first want to thank our terrific education team and our research team at the Detroit Regional Chamber who do fabulous work. But it takes a village, as Nicola mentioned. So I want to thank the Kresge Foundation, specifically Bill Moses, the managing director of Kresge's education programs, for all of his efforts in advancing education attainment, not just in Detroit, but across the country, and their partnership with the Detroit Regional Chamber. I also want to thank our research partner, the University of Michigan Youth Policy Lab, for helping analyze all of this data. And thank you all for everyone else who has played a role in getting us here today. Now, before I get into the education report, I want to begin with a special award and recognize one of the finest leaders in this space. Annually, the Chamber is pleased to present the Excellence in Education Leadership Award, presented to a leader in our region who has made an outsized impact improving our educational landscape. This year's award recipient is special, certainly because of her leadership in the areas of education, children, and equity, but also because of her broad influence that extends far beyond the Detroit region and far beyond the issues of education. It's also special this year because our award recipient is leaving us. Tonya Allen, the CEO of the Skillman Foundation since 2014, is this year's award recipient. Not only has the Skillman Foundation, under her tremendous leadership, taking that entity's influence to new levels, her personal leadership has played a central role in efforts such as the statewide Launch Michigan education reform effort, the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children, the Michigan Education Excellence Foundation, and in partnership with the Michigan Education Excellence Foundation, the Detroit Regional Chamber, Tonya has played a key role in advancing the Detroit Promise and the Detroit Drives Degrees Regional Collective Action Plan. I can think of no one more fitting of this special award. So let's hear from Tonya herself.
Hi, everyone. I am so honored to receive the Education Excellence Award from the Detroit Chamber. I am appreciative to know that our colleagues choose to honor the Skillman Foundation and my contributions to improving education, which is the cornerstone to our state's economy and quality of life. As you all may know, this is privileged work, the ability to get in good trouble, the willingness to do things that are uncomfortable because they benefit the greater good, as the late Congressman John Lewis described. To be able to do it besides partners like the Detroit Regional Chamber who act courageously and with attention is also a privilege. This work cannot be accomplished by a singular person or organization. It is the work of the collective, our civic sector, that must change the education system on behalf of our citizens and our children. And that's exactly what we have done in Michigan. We have accomplished a lot, but there is still much to do. And I am proud of my own contributions to the many successful education efforts in our state and our region. I'm going to recount some of them, not to glorify myself, but rather to remind you that we can do big things if we work collaboratively together. We have built a strong civic muscle, and we must not let it atrophy. We must continue to exercise it so that we can build on this important work, understanding and knowing that there's still much more to do. So here are the fruits of our collective labor, resulting from our might and our ambition. First, the Coalition for the Future of Detroit School Children, where we developed a plan and lobbied the governor and legislature to preserve Detroit Public Schools from bankruptcy by establishing Detroit Public Schools Community District, a debt-free school district that is under local control with an elected school board. Had it not been for this work, we could not have hired Dr. Beatty, seen academic improvements for our students, or have a financially strong school district with a surplus. Or the Detroit Promise, which covers students who graduate from Detroit School with full tuition for community college. For those students that have succeeded academically during high school, full tuition is covered for numerous four-year state universities. We have developed a model that's leading the country in increasing college retention and completion among our students. Or the Detroit Drives Degrees initiative, which has assembled the leaders of K-12, higher education, and business to increase the number of degrees that adults in our region have. By increasing our talent dividend, it increases our ability to thrive as a region. This work is important to us all because it shows that large institutions like universities and school districts that sometimes seem resistant to change are actually embracing change and leading the way. They are rewriting the rules to ensure that all of our region people are able to access degrees without getting stuck by arbitrary rules. And lastly, I want to share with you the Launch Michigan initiative, which is a coalition of educators, business, philanthropy, and community who are working to ensure that our state modernizes its education system and funding system. Our goal is to ensure that every child in Michigan has a high quality education and to make sure children with the greatest need get the greatest access to resources so that everyone in our state thrives and we are no longer stratified by geography, race, income, or need. Michigan cannot move forward if it continues to leave its Black, Indigenous, and people of color behind. We cannot move forward if we continue to leave our rural communities and low-income areas behind. The big takeaway from each of these efforts is that if we put our minds to it, we can change our state and we can redesign the future for our children. The future isn't finished, but in order for it to be better, it requires all of us to act boldly and courageously. So as I depart, I want to share this truth, that if we want an enabling environment for business, then business must be willing to lead in coalition with educators, community, and philanthropy. Business can't be afraid to get in good trouble, which can sometimes be messy, noisy, and complex. Business must act with courage and act on behalf of our greater good, not just our individual good or business interests. Business has to act with radical love, which is not just about accepting or tweaking the rules, but actually rewriting them so that everyone has an equal shot at achieving America's promise and growing Michigan's economy. I know you all are in good hands. Sandy Barua is good trouble, and he surely will lead you into more of it. Please back him and support him because it will be for our collective effort that we will make a difference. And in closing, I want to thank again the Chamber, Sandy, Greg Handel, the full leadership team and complement for its leadership and fierce advocacy for Southeast Michigan and our full state to make education accessible and equitable for all. Again, on behalf of the Skillman Foundation and myself, I say thank you.
Tonya, thank you so much for that. Thank you for those inspirational words. But more importantly, thank you for your tremendous work to the children of Detroit and across Michigan. And we wish you all the best. And we wish you all our love as you take the helm as the CEO of the McKnight Foundation in Minneapolis later on this month. It's no secret that businesses are in a global war for talent today. And the talent needs become more complex and more demanding every day. Talent is by far the top concern of businesses looking to relocate to Michigan. Therefore, it's critical to our economic development efforts, our business attraction efforts, and our quality of life. It is the top indicator of regional economic health. Therefore, it's important to policymakers as well. The regions that have the greatest talent are better positioned to compete and win in the 21st century global economy. And specifically for Michigan, having the necessary talent base is essential to maintaining our leadership in key industries such as next generation mobility, smart manufacturing, healthcare, information technology, and several others. In order to ensure that our region is competitive in the 21st century economy, our businesses need to have the talent base to grow and succeed right here at home, and that we all live in healthy and equitable communities. Now, the Chamber has developed the most comprehensive suite of education and talent programs geared towards one North Star, achieving 60% of our adults in the region having a 2-year, 4-year, or a highly skilled credential. So either a 2-year degree, a 4-year degree, or a credential in a highly skilled area such as nursing or welding. And it's not enough just to achieve 60% of our adults having this credential or degree. We need to simultaneously reduce the racial equity gap in education by half. And as you're going to see later on in this presentation, that is a big lift. Now, the way we've structured our programs at the Detroit Regional Chamber is that we are led by a CEO Talent Council, which is chaired by Kelly's CEO, Peter Quigley. This CEO Talent Council is comprised of, well, CEOs from across the region representing major businesses that help guide and infuse business input into our entire education and talent portfolio of programs. Now, our strategy is developed by our Detroit Drives Degrees program, which is a collective action model in partnership with leading businesses, philanthropy, and educational entities that help shape our work and actually developed the 60% by 2030 goal, along with our goal to reduce our racial equity gap in half. The rest of our programs, as you can see below, are bucketed into 4 distinct areas. One is increasing access to education. How do we fill the pipeline? Get more people, adults and students, into the educational pipeline. Secondly, ensuring success. We have learned, and we all know now, it's not enough to get people enrolled. We need to ensure that they're successful through whatever educational experience they have chosen. Thirdly, we need to grow our talent base. We need to ensure that we're recruiting talent from other areas into the Detroit region and Michigan. And we need to get more people who are currently live here the skills that they need that can serve businesses and serve their families better. And then finally, the fourth bucket is our award-winning, policy and advocacy office based in Lansing to advocate for statewide policies that will help achieve the 60% by 2030 goal. Now, having an educational attainment goal may seem like a no-brainer, especially when the U.S. now only ranks 6th in educational attainment of all of the OECD nations. But as recently as 2015, Michigan was one of the only states without a statewide higher educational attainment goal. In 2016, the Detroit Regional Chamber established the 60% by 2030 attainment goal. And in just 2019, we were very pleased that Governor Whitmer took our lead and adopted that same 60% goal for the state of Michigan. So why is this 60% goal important? Well, let's look at some of our best-in-class competitors. Seattle and Minneapolis today are already over 60%, the goal that we have set for 2030, because we sit at under 49% today. So yet again, we have a heavy lift for us. Now, meeting our 60% attainment goal would result in real economic gains for our region and, more importantly, for our citizens. Our region would have an additional $42 billion of income flowing into households should we meet that 60% goal. In fact, for every percentage point increase in our educational attainment rate, someone with either a bachelor's degree or higher would result in a per capita income increase of $1,250. And if we achieve that goal by 2030, that would move us closer to where our best-in-class regions are today, such as Seattle, which has a per capita income of over $64,000 a year. Now, the crises of 2020 have exacerbated our challenges in many areas, and education is certainly no exception. Everything from filling the education pipeline, keeping students enrolled, and advancing equity in education access and outcomes have all been impacted by the COVID crisis. Now, usually, in times of economic downturn, the number of persons opting to enhance their education experience goes up. Not this time. Nationally, graduating high school seniors enrolling in college dropped 21.9% last year. And that number approaches the 60% range when we look at just persons of color enrolling in a higher education experience. This national trend is mirrored here in Michigan. Locally, with our Detroit Promise program, we saw a 36% drop in enrollment in community college. So despite these Detroit students having access to a tuition-free pathway, we saw a drop of over 1/3 of students taking advantage of this free collegiate program. In Michigan, overall, enrollment in our four-year colleges is down 6% and 13% for our two-year colleges. Now, I do want to take a moment to celebrate the great work of our Detroit Promise team. When COVID hit, they knew that many of our Promise students might need a little, or frankly a lot, of help making that hard pivot to online learning, as many of these students were first-time college goers in their family. Our team immediately surveyed students attending our local community colleges under the Promise program and rapidly responded by getting them laptops and Wi-Fi access by working with service providers like Comcast. This really shows the commitment of our Promise team. They didn't even ask for permission. They just responded and did what our students needed. And because of their efforts, we were able to keep a vast majority of our Promise students enrolled, completing their educational experience for that academic year. So COVID does not paint a pretty data picture. But as we get into more traditional data points, the news gets, well, frankly, not a lot better. As employers, we all rely on this region's pipeline, talent pipeline, to get the talent we need to run our businesses and compete globally. And that pipeline is very leaky. As you can see from the cover of our January Detroiter magazine, if you take 100 ninth graders in 2009 and track them, you would see that of that 100 ninth graders in 2009, only 78 of that 100 would end up graduating on time in 2013. And of that 100, 57 would enroll in college. And of that 100, only 30 of those would have earned a degree or credential by 2019. We certainly cannot achieve our 60% goal with performance like that. Now, a little bit of good news. High school graduation rates have increased slightly since 2015 across our region. But our regional numbers now match the national average at 85%, which is certainly better than it was before. However, there's a little bit of bad news to go with the good news. The share of Detroit region's high school students who are considered college ready, and that is defined by ACT or SAT scores, has decreased from 40% to only 36% over the last 5 years. And that picture looks even worse when you compare it to the national average of 52%, which frankly is nothing to write home about either. Now, even more alarming, as you can see in orange, is the data for the city of Detroit, where only about 1 in 10 are considered ready for a post-secondary college or credential program, again based on SAT or ACT testing. Now, this next graph tells an important story, but it takes a minute to understand it. What this graph communicates is what percentage of high school seniors that enrolled in college after graduation went on to receive a degree within 6 years of entering college. So the first set of blue bars indicates the high school class of 2011 that did enroll in community college. 27% of them received a degree. Of those class of 2011 seniors that enrolled in a 4-year program, 65% received a degree. And while these numbers have been generally rising, this is good news. But when you look at the city of Detroit numbers, you can see we have a lot of work to do, not just across the region, but specifically in areas like the city of Detroit. Now, in pursuing our 60% goal, we can see our region's educational attainment level is indeed increasing. rising from the mid 30% range to over 41% today. We're roughly at the national average now. However, we are increasing at the same pace as other American regions. Therefore, from a competitive standpoint, we're not making progress. For example, in the same period of time, the Boston region has gone from the low 50% range to 56% today. Now, we often think about educational attainment as a young person's game, but there's no path to achieving our 60% goal without targeting adults. There are roughly 700,000 adults in our region that have some college credits or who have started a certificate program but don't have the degree or the credential to show for it. These 700,000 people are a great opportunity to increase our educational attainment levels, but both government and corporate policies will need to change to make a pathway for these adults. Now, this reflects my earlier comments about the strong economy that existed before COVID. Now, the strong economy has lured people away from educational experiences, whereas when economic times slow down, people generally opt for education because the job market is not as lucrative as they would like. You see this during the dot-com bust of the early 2000s. We saw an increase in access to education, and then you saw that same spike again around the time of the Great Recession. The strengthening economy since about 2012, we've seen steady declines in adult enrollment, adults opting to stay in the workforce to take advantage of that lucrative job market. Now, this next graph shows the raw numbers of adults earning a degree has trended downward over the past 5 years, as we've previously discussed. However, if you look closely, you'll see that it is the community college enrollment, the 2-year programs, where the decline is most noticeable. So it's really those working adults who would normally take advantage of a 2-year program that have opted for staying in the job market as opposed to pursuing education. Now, there's some good news this week focused on easing the pathway for adults to complete their degree or credential. The state of Michigan launched a program the chamber not only advocated for, but helped develop, called Michigan Reconnect. This is a $30 million statewide program supported by Democrats and Republicans to provide a tuition-free pathway for Michigan adults with some college credits already under their belt, the 700,000 people in our region that I mentioned earlier, to get that college degree or that certificate. And this will be another tool in our arsenal to reach our 60% goal. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the 60% goal is only part of the equation. We cannot achieve 60% without reducing that equity gap. Our state has the 3rd highest equity gap in the nation at 21.9%, meaning that in Michigan, a Black American entering as a college freshman will see a over 20% lower chance of graduation than their white counterpart. And we all know this is unacceptable from a societal standpoint, but it is also unacceptable from a standpoint of achieving our 60% goal. The racial disparities can also be seen when we look at educational achievement by race. In our region, 44% of whites have an associate's degree or higher, compared to 26% for Black Americans and 28% for Hispanic or Latinos. Now, this might seem obvious, but the higher your education level, not only will you see higher wages, but a much lower chance of being unemployed. And this is another equity issue as well, too. We have seen our professional class, which are predominantly white, have a much lower impact to their unemployment rate. You can see it's gone here from 2% to only 4%, which is really a small bump in what is arguably the worst economy in 100 years. But you see tremendous spikes in those with either a high school or even less than high school education. So during this pandemic, we have seen the equity issue play out in multiple ways. Those higher skilled job workers are more likely to keep their income stable, had higher incomes to start with, and more able to work from home, and they were able to stay safer because they were better isolated from the virus, staying in their homes. Now, I've just scratched the surface here on all types of data, including adult education, high school matriculation, and of course, equity. But I wanted to highlight some of the key numbers that are important for all of us to understand. Now, as I close out this high-level summary of this year's State of Education report, allow me to do the following. One, urge you to examine the full report and the online version, which is actually interactive this year, and include video links to bring some of the data stories to life. The full version also includes far more detailed information than I've been able to capture here. Next, please join me in thanking our sponsors and our key partners, including Kelly, Lake Michigan Credit Union, TCF, Davenport University, University of Detroit Mercy, Independent Bank, University of Michigan Youth Policy Lab, and our research partner, of course, the Kresge Foundation. And coming up next, some world-class thought leadership to put this data into context. Thank you so much.
You've heard the phrase, "we're all in this together," so many times you're saying it in your sleep. At Lake Michigan Credit Union, we're putting our money where our mouth is, with special low rates to help you earn more and pay less on the things you need most. Like 3% on home equity loans, rates as low as 6.25% on our Prime Platinum card, and just 3% down on a new home. Because at Lake Michigan Credit Union, our numbers speak louder than words. Lake Michigan Credit Union, you'll love banking here.
This presentation is sponsored by Lake Michigan Credit Union. Please welcome Metropolitan Policy Fellow at the Brookings Institution, Andre Perry.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I want to thank Sandy for his incredible leadership here. The numbers are startling, and we're going to go into those numbers in a little bit. But I also want to thank Tonya Allen and congratulate her for her continued leadership in education. I befriended her a while back and followed her career. Nothing but excellence there. And Nicola, thank you for your remarks. I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of developing a teacher pipeline. Many of you know I was the founding dean of urban education at Davenport University, and it was there where I will develop programs to address many of the issues I will present to you today. So if we can get the PowerPoint up on the screen, thank you very much. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about education reform because the data was presented so that we could have action. But I want to address wealth disparities that underlie a lot of the report's findings. So much of the report, and please pick it up, read it thoroughly. So much of the report was focused on educational attainment and selection of students into colleges. And I'm going to focus there because it really shows the wealth divides in this country. At Brookings Institution, I look at Black majority cities and neighborhoods, and you can see here there are a lot of them, and in them are families and children. And to set some context, I always state that children don't live in schools; they live in communities. So when we're talking about education, it's important not to just focus on schools. They're connected to other assets and sectors. Just a little bit on wealth. As Sandy stated, the coronavirus exposed many vulnerabilities that stem from a lack of wealth. And I just also want to reframe a little thing, something that we constantly talk about, the importance of education on income. But actually, wealth predicts for education and health and college enrollment. And so we should be trying to not only reform education, but it's in the context of developing wealth. And that's what I'm going to talk to you today about. Many of you know the data that white Americans have about 10 times the amount of wealth as Black Americans. And that underlies many of the findings in these reports that you will see. And what's interesting, high school graduation rates have increased, and K-12 achievement has essentially plateaued. So we're really starting to tap out on what we've done. Some of you know that I was in the ed reform space for quite a bit as the CEO of the Capital One University of New Orleans Charter Network, and we did a lot to reform schools, but a lot of that was at the expense of wealth, and I'll explain that a little bit later. College enrollment, as was stated, is in decline, particularly amid the pandemic, and higher education is associated with greater wealth within race groups, meaning the more wealth the more higher education get, the better the wealth profile. But more education does not solve the problem of the racial wealth disparity. And so we got to look beyond education to do that. And here's an example of what I'm saying. Highly selective institutions generally select from high socioeconomic backgrounds. You see in the lowest, along the x-axis, you can see the quintiles of income or socioeconomic status. And you can see selective four-year institutions are lowest, students in that range are don't go to those selective four-year institutions. And when you control for educational outcomes, you also still see this trend. So highly desirable or highly accomplished Black students, white students from the lowest income quartile still go to not selective institutions. And likewise, private for-profit colleges select those low income students. We know this. This phenomenon is sort of, I'm going to pull from a Harry Potter reference. The wand chooses the wizard in many cases. We're constantly talking about what children need to do to prepare, but what are higher education institutions doing to prepare for students? If we really want to put people in the pipeline, put them in the pipeline, put them in all institutions. Selective institutions are not absolved from selecting poor students. They have to be a part of this. And we also know that student college options increase with their wealth profile. And so we've constantly got to look at other areas in which wealth is extracted from Black and brown communities. And we have to change the assumption that education predicts for wealth. No, wealth predicts for educational attainment. So you got to switch the focus a little bit and look at what's underlying the stagnation. Because remember, actually, educational attainment is actually improving in a lot of ways, but you're not going to overcome those gaps if you don't address the underlying conditions. And so I want to just, again, before I get into some data, understand how wealth plays out in the lives of Black Americans. Student debt influences job decisions. We know that under normal circumstances, student debt pushes workers to choose jobs that they are less passionate about and away from public interest careers that offer lower salaries. Because there's college graduates essentially say, hey, I need to pay off my loan instead of going for the careers they want. And graduates with student debt take on jobs that have higher initial salary, but lower potential for wage growth. So again, they're selecting based upon their ability to clear these loans. And so we need to get to a system where students are not burdened with the having to pay back that loan so they can go into the careers they want. But what we're seeing in terms of the enrollment drops, again, debt influences decisions. The reason why people are not going to college because they're making a calculated decision to not expend their discretionary resources. And that's understandable in this moment in time. But we got to understand that wealth and debt are the problems. And just to put this into perspective, households with zero or negative net worth hold 51% of student debt. Now, Black households make up 14% of the population, but hold 19% of the student debt. So Black students we need to, again, stop this narrative that if only the schools would improve, if only students would improve. Students are actually going to college more, and they're taking out more debt, and their profiles are not changing. We know that Black college graduates have the same debt or wealth profiles as high school dropouts. And so we need to correct for some of these issues. Again, coming from households with high net worth more than quintuples the likelihood of college graduation. So instead of trying to tinker with schools, we need to tinker with the environments students are in. And one of the conclusions of the report, which I agree with, that the Detroit region must accelerate education initiatives, but I want to add a caveat that help families and communities build wealth. And I have a great passion for this, particularly in Detroit. This is my father, who was he was born in Detroit, and he died outside of Detroit. He was killed in Jackson State Penitentiary, not that far outside of Detroit, as you know. But one of the things I did was in writing my book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black City, I followed where he lived in Detroit and in Pittsburgh. And this data is will show you what I found. First of all, this is a chart looking at the value of homes based on zip code. And on that x-axis is the concentration of Black people in a zip code. And then on the y-axis is indicated on top of the bar chart. That's the price within those zip codes. So as you can see, Black households in areas that have little to no Black residents are valued at $340,000 roughly. And they're about half of that as much in areas that are 50% or higher in terms of the share of the Black population. Well, people will say that's because of education, that's because of crime. But those are things you can control for in a study, and that's what we did. We looked at that absolute price difference. We controlled for the structural characteristics, the size of the home, number of rooms, all the physical characteristics. But then we controlled for neighborhood amenities. So education, crime, walkability, all those fancy Zillow metrics. And what we found that homes in Black neighborhoods are underpriced by 23%, about $48,000 per home. Accumulatively, that's $156 billion in lost equity. And this is occurring all over the United States. Wherever you see a magenta circle, that's where devaluation is occurring. Wherever you see a green circle, that's where homes in Black neighborhoods are priced higher. Why is that important? And just to give you a little context, Detroit, Michigan is 37% difference, about $28,000 per home. And you can see in the United States, in Lynchburg, 81% difference, Rochester, 65% difference. These are astronomical numbers. Nashville, plus 10%, Boston, plus 23%. And no, Boston is not less racist than Lynchburg or Detroit, but the home prices are higher. But I just want to put this in perspective, because when we're talking about educational attainment and you're not talking about housing, something's wrong there, because we know we pay for education through the taxes we collect on property. So I just want to put this $156 billion in perspective, what it means for families and communities. It would have financed more than 4 million Black-owned businesses based on the average amount Blacks use to start up their firms. It would have paid for more than 8 million four-year degrees based on the average amount of a public four-year education. Replaced the pipes in Flint, Michigan 3,000 times over. It's covered nearly all of Hurricane Katrina damage, and it's doubled the annual economic burden of the opioid crisis. My father was a heroin addict, and he lived in areas that was severely devalued. There is no question he was killed at the hands of another inmate in Jackson State Penitentiary that was partially his involvement in the drug game that led there. But there's no question, if he lived in a neighborhood that had proper housing revenues going to the city coffers, he would have had better educational opportunities, more likelihood, increase the likelihood of him going to college, to start a business, to not go to prison and go to a drug treatment facility. This is why I always say that there's nothing wrong with Black people that ending racism can't solve. We have got to stop saying, what can we do to schools? What can we do to children and families? And let's look at the structures they are in. There are some great things in Detroit that's happening that actually addresses wealth. Detroit Promise is a direct way to address debt. The Promise Path, again, this is about providing students with the assistance around finances. This is a good thing. I'll be writing about the regional debt forgiveness that you're seeing, partnership between Henry Ford, Oakland, and Wayne State, a great initiative that addresses education, but at the same time addresses debt and wealth. And Detroit Reconnect. Again, this is an important point, because again, we talk about it's all about the kids, but no, education is also about the adults too. That's something we got to condition ourselves to talk about. There are some other things that I'm hoping the Detroit region can take on. We should develop an equity scorecard. Derek Hamilton of the New School and I are actually working on this at the federal level, but we need to develop an equity scorecard that measures educational initiatives' potential impact on wealth. I mentioned I was CEO of the Capital One UNO Charter Network, and during that time, during this time of that reform, we saw a reduction in the number of Black teachers in the system. That hurt the Black middle class. That hurt educational attainment. If we would have run our initiatives through this equity scorecard, we would have predicted that on the front end. So again, we need the same way we score bills and legislation to see its impact on the budget. We need a scorecard that measures initiatives impact on equity. And we certainly need that in education. We need initiatives that will extend the school year. Without question, we're going to see learning loss. That's going to happen. That's already happened. And so we need to extend the school year and create and use summer school as a way. And one of the silver linings of distance learning, virtual learning, is now students and teachers are becoming more comfortable. They can actually utilize this technology in the summer months when low-income folks actually need programs and services. We need more public-private partnerships that encourage the recruitment of teachers of color. The more teachers of color you have, the more you'll see the economy grow, the more the pie grows, the more revenue you have for schools. That is a no-brainer. And then there's a lot of talk about tutoring. We need to figure out ways to get more tutors in school systems, and we need to figure out ways to convert those tutors into teachers. And so colleges and schools of education need resources to develop these initiatives, because not only are we going to see a mass exodus due to retirement because of COVID, we also need to have efforts to retain teachers currently in, and efforts to get some of these tutors into the profession. I'm going to close. A lot of these ideas you can find in my book, Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Property in America's Black Cities. But I'm looking forward to this conversation about the data. So thank you. And you can bring me back up on the screen.
Joining Dr. Perry, please welcome President and CEO of Henry Ford Health System, Wright Lassiter.
Hello, everyone. Well, we've just been really fortunate to hear Dr. Perry walk through a very substantive presentation that just sort of teases the topic around education, wealth, inequities, et cetera. And so I'm really pleased and honored to have an opportunity to engage Andre Perry in a conversation highlighting key points of the talk that he made. Let me just remind the audience that we want this to be interactive. And so while Andre and I will engage in some dialogue and conversation, we certainly want that fueled by your questions as well. And so please know that the chat is available. If you have a question that you'd like me to pose to Dr. Perry, place it in the chat and it'll get forwarded to me. And I'll do my best to try to get through as many of your questions as possible. So with that, I look forward to a really engaging conversation. Dr. Perry, I see your face back on the screen now, and let me just say that this was sort of like the forward to a great movie, a great series that we got teased with a little bit of data and with some perspectives, and now we want to try to get into to more conversation. Let me start first and foremost by just telling you that it's a great honor and privilege to spend some time with you this morning. I read a lot about you and your work at the Brookings Institution. Got a copy of your book when I was tasked with moderating this conversation and began going through it. So I'm very, very appreciative of an opportunity to spend a little time with you. It was very instructive as you began your conversation, really talking about both the importance of teacher pipelines, but also the connection between wealth and education. I think our viewers were very appreciative of you doing a bit of analysis on this local region and helping us understand a bit around, what education plans we have going on that address wealth and address educational attainment. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time with that. You talked a bit about, on a couple of cases, the impact of a global pandemic on this data and on educational attainment and on what we might need to do to support the education system, but specifically to address education equity. And so maybe I'd ask you to just start with addressing in some way a bit about the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on educational attainment and what things we need to do to respond and how the data is influenced by it.
Yeah, I mean, and I said this in the presentation, we are going to have learning loss because of this. The disparities in broadband, computer access, all of these different things and overall quality really show up because of the COVID pandemic. And so we need to address those issues. We all want kids to go back to school. That's the one thing everyone can agree to, but we all want students to go back to school safely. And so that means we've got to encourage Congress to pass the spending bill so that states can actually finance the equipment so that schools can socially distance properly. In addition to that, we need all teachers to be vaccinated to sort of assuage the concerns of teachers, because many teachers, particularly older teachers, who many of, like I mentioned, are retiring. We need to get them vaccinated. And we need to use the summer months as a way, I hesitate to say catch up, because having essentially a year pause, if you will, thank goodness for technology, because the learning loss would be worse than it is. Mm-hmm. But we need to extend the school year in the months for the next few years. And we need to utilize our technology and supports. And this is where private industry can certainly help in terms of developing partnerships in that regard. And I think also, I don't want to skirt away from one of the reasons why we're here, and that's racism. The summer months also should be used. And, this summer, if it was the summer of discontent and unrest, let this be the summer of learning about civics. Let this be the summer about learning about racism, slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, all these different things, because it's clear that the misinformation over time has led to the embrace of conspiracy theories and other things today. And that's also an existential threat to education. The sort of this disbelief in facts, and so it's incumbent upon the educational system to work on these, but again, not in a way that blames people, but just recognizes the overall socioeconomic conditions that students live in.
Well, I really appreciate that. I think, your comment about learning about the impact of racism and having those conversations, we're at a point in time where our country has been sensitized in a way that maybe it hasn't been in some time for that kind of dialogue. And so I appreciate you highlighting that. I would tell you that the questions from the audience are starting to fly in, and so I want to make sure that I begin to try to address a few of those before I come back to some questions of my own. One question from the audience says, there's been considerable focus on wage data alignment with degree category as part of the National Higher Education Scorecard conversation. How do we help contextualize this in light of what we really want students to take away from their degree area of choice? And as you talked a bit about the issues of debt burden and choices. So maybe talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, I'm working on a project right now that examining what kind of choices would people make if they didn't have debt. What kind of schools would they go to? I mean, we have in the United States thousands of institutions that run the range of, from trade to more academic types of degrees. But what it looks like on the national level is that people are selecting based on their socioeconomic class, not what they want to become.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to a scorecard, in this conversation, I've been focusing on if we could remove debt, if we could somehow remove debt as a burden. And, how would we select the institutions that we're interested in? I actually think you would see enrollment in the non-selective institutions go up as a result. I actually think people just wouldn't select the typical selective institutions as a result.
Mm-hmm.
We have a system that rewards actually a class hierarchy in so many ways. One of the questions I see, the wand chooses the wizard. That's the analogy I use. And that's true. Like a lot of institutions built sort of because our institutions are judged on reputational type of factors, they've said instead of making particularly public institutions looking like the public,
mm-hmm.
they said we'll essentially recruit the folks who have sort of built-in advantages. Right. And that's another way to look at it, that many of the students, most students didn't determine where they lived, how much money their parents made, what kind of degree their grandfather had, mm-hmm. whether or not their grandfather was a homeowner or not. Mm-hmm. All of these things are as influential on degree attainment as hard work and all these other things. So for me, it's about recognizing if we do create a scorecard in this area, we really do need to see the impact of these bills on wealth, because if we can start chipping away at that, you'll start to see students really make the choices they want to make instead of making choices about their loan. Yeah. And that's what we're seeing all across the country.
Got it. Yeah, I would just tell you that I appreciated your commentary about the wand choosing the wizard. I think back to our daughter and who was a big Harry Potter fan, and we've watched the series on several occasions, and this notion of the wand choosing the wizard, I think, is a very apt analogy as you describe the educational system as it relates to students of color. Another question that's come in from an attendee says that this individual attended a blue ribbon school and one that had lost its accreditation. And there was a vast difference in the focus that the school spent on educating students about post-secondary options. how do we do a better job of ensuring students know what options and what resources could be available to them as they think about their future beyond secondary education?
Not only do we need to recruit more teachers of color, we also need to recruit more counselors. I mean, let's be honest, there's just not enough human power in the schools. And this is particularly true in this environment. We need more space, and we need more counselors, and we need more teachers with high expectations. And the first thing we cut when there's any kind of budget crisis, we cut the counselors, we cut those kind of services. But those are the times when private industry must step up. And that's something, in terms of the chamber, when you're seeing the austerity, you got to fill that gap. Do not allow these gaps in counseling services, in scholarships, because if you don't fill the gap, fill the breach, you're going to see what we're seeing now. More students of color and low income not going to school.
Got it. Well, I appreciate that. And I would just say, as we're getting to our 2-minute warning, you just referenced the chamber and how the local business community needs to step in the gap because there will always be gaps in our local school systems. And so, the question I was going to close with is what role should local businesses play in ensuring that our schools have sort of the quilt and fabric that's necessary for success of students of color? I think you've begun addressing that as it relates to financial support. I would just say that there are significant efforts underway in Detroit, in particular with the business community, looking to lean in, knowing that our Detroit Public School Community District has had some historic challenges and continues to face challenges as it looks to meet the needs of the community and students that it serves. Any other counsel you would give to a local business leader and chamber leader around what else you think we might do in this community?
I mean, absolutely. And I think Detroit is starting to make this transition. What I'm seeing, quality chambers and other economic development like organizations doing, they're moving away from blaming schools to addressing the overall environments they are in. And I think much of the activity on the higher ed side in particular, you're seeing the chamber step up in ways that, quite frankly, they didn't in the past. And in fact, many chambers across the country would say, if we can just fix the school, everything will be all right. No, that's essentially blaming people for problems they didn't create. And so for me, the chamber is already making that turn, but we can do more. For the first time in history, I can honestly say business has stepped up in terms of investing in Black businesses, investing in the racial justice issues. That window is going to close, in my opinion. And it's important that the chamber advocates that government picks up the ball, particularly for demonstration projects that private industry created, because we're going to need those scholarships. We're going to need that counseling. We're going to need that extended school year. So private industry might kick it off, but we need government agencies to continue them.
Well, let me just say that, Dr. Perry, you and I could continue this conversation for quite a while, but I know we've got more in the program, and we'll happily have you in a private session a little bit later to talk some more. So I just want to tell you, it's been my absolute pleasure to spend time chatting with you a bit this morning. Appreciate your comments and your wisdom and all the work you're doing to understand this topic and advance it. And appreciate you being here with us. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Can you feel that? Something's changing. A shift from a focus on me to something bigger. Because while it's perfectly fair to ask, what's in it for me? Finding the answer comes from asking, what's in it for we? At TCF Bank, our purpose lies in answering that question, in giving every me the financial strength to make us all a stronger we.
This panel discussion is sponsored by TCF Bank. Please welcome President of Henry Ford College, Russ Cavalluna. President and CEO of Kelly, Peter Quigley. Director of Policy Outreach at Opportunity Insights, David Williams. And to moderate the discussion, Group Publisher at Grain Communications, Mary Kramer.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We have 20 minutes, and we have a lot to cover. We've heard some terrific information already, a lot of data, and some really interesting perspectives from Andre just a moment ago. So let me get to it, and I'm going to start with you, David. You, like Andre, have the perspective of being involved in a think tank kind of situation. And I'm curious, you're at Harvard, but you also have your experience here in Detroit when you were part of Mayor Duggan's office. So as you listen to the program this morning, and when you're thinking about the data that we've seen, the numbers are going in the wrong direction. And the data lags. So the data that we've seen today is a couple of years old. How do you see the pandemic affecting the data that we'll be looking at in the next 12 months? And what can we do now to try and arrest the wrong direction on that data?
Yeah, Mary, thank you very much. And also, I appreciate the Detroit cred reference. I'm always good to be involved in conversations about the Motor City, even if it's remote from another place. But I think, the pandemic is really exacerbating trends that we've been seeing for a very long time. And I want to make 3 quick points. So, Opportunity Insights, we use big data to try and study these issues to figure out, right, what are policy pathways forward. And one thing we do is use IRS data to look historically at trends in economic mobility. So, right, if you were born in 1940, there was a 90% chance that you would grow up to earn more than your parents and be upwardly mobile. But that's changed dramatically, so much so that for folks who were born in the 80s in the job market today, it's a 50-50 shot whether or not you will grow up to earn more than your parents and be upwardly mobile, right? And I think this really reflects how the economy's changed, right? Like you need something like a college degree to be able to compete in the economy today, right? We're not living in the 1940s, 50s, or 60s. It's a very different world. And I think these trends that we're seeing in the Chamber's report kind of reflect really disheartening trends. And I think to your point, we also have recent data that our organization uses to see, not just 2, 3, 5 years ago, but what's that pandemic doing to our economy and our community right now. And something we're seeing, again, a very disheartening trend is that, right, employment rates for low-wage workers were actually down by almost 25% compared to pre-pandemic. But in some sense, the recession is actually over for higher wage workers, right? So COVID is really exacerbating these trends that we're already seeing. And we're also seeing increased learning gaps between high income and low income communities in Michigan as well, right? So if we're not taking action right now, right, these trends that we've been seeing for the past 10, 20, 30 years are going to continue in an exponential way. But one last point is, right, is that there is points for optimism. Right, I think work the Chamber is doing, right, work happening in the region, the Detroit Promise program, like Dr. Perry mentioned, and the Detroit Promise Path, right, those are evidence-based programs that really work, right, kind of based on things like happening in the City University of New York system, the SEEK and ASAP programs, right, that provide comprehensive support to low-income students, and even sometimes low-income students who are less academically prepared than their counterparts, right? What we see is that when you provide that financial and human capital support, right, those students 5, 10 years, 15 years after graduation, right, they're earning just as much as their wealthier and more academically prepared counterparts, right? So despite these disheartening trends, we know things that work. They're already starting to be implemented locally here. And if we continue to invest in those, right, we can have real impact.
Thank you. Now, Peter, Kelly Services succeeds only if you are able to supply your clients with the kinds of skilled workers that they are asking, they seek from you. So let's talk a little bit about why you took this role with the Detroit Regional Chamber, leading the CEO Council. What do you see? Why are you doing this? And what do you think you and your peers can contribute to solving the issues of and getting us to a 60% level for post-secondary education attainment?
Thank you, Mary, and it's great to be with you, and it's a privilege to be on a panel with Russ and David. So, gentlemen, glad to be with you today. Mary, as you said, at Kelly, we're right in the middle of the supply and demand equation. And even before the pandemic, our customers were exasperated by the gap between the credentials and skills that they were looking for and our ability to provide individuals with those. And that it's all about the education and the experiences that those individuals have. And the report today, the data that Sandy shared, should really be a wake-up call, because the downstream impact of our failure to address this crisis is compelling. It's demonstrable in terms of the quality of the workforce, in terms of the cost of hiring, in terms of the lack of productivity for unfilled jobs. So today should be a wake-up call for business leaders in particular, because of the impact that it'll have on businesses 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and it's exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. So I think business leaders have a unique role to play, and I'm delighted to have taken on the role as chair of the CEO Talent Council, because I think while education is a critical component, it is so complex and systemic that it requires the cooperation and collaboration of the higher education, of K-12, of businesses, of the government, of philanthropic organizations, and to really work together to try to address many of the issues that Dr. Perry identified, but also issues that we have right here in our backyard. And I think that the Chamber can play a unique role in providing the connective tissue between the important constituencies that need to be involved in this critical issue. And I think the CEO Talent Council and the Chamber can play a role in areas of credentialing and job laddering and other things that are so critical to addressing this issue.
Well, I think the president of Henry Ford College is ready and willing to be part of that supply chain equation that you mentioned, supply and demand. Russ, I know that you and I have talked before, and you're just like, tell me what you need, guarantee the job, and I can get you what you need. So what do you need from Peter and from other CEOs or business owners who are on this, who are listening today?
Yeah, well, you said it, Mary. It's partnership with a focus on students and what they most often drive themselves to school for, and that is a meaningful opportunity for a better career and a better life as a result. So we've done that with some employers to some success with Ford Motor Company and DTE Energy, but we've got to expand that, because if the premise that Sandy laid out at the beginning of this is troubling to you, that is that we are not getting enough post-secondary credentials in our region, and we have an ugly gap in success in higher education on the racial fault line. If that's a problem to a CEO, because it threatens the chances for their prosperity of their institution, then come to a community college, come to Henry Ford and say, we need more skills on this front. And we think that the way to do this is to upskill at a community college and put them on a track for potentially higher education achievement. Come to us and tell us what it is you need. And I can promise you, we can drive enrollment with what our students come to college for, which is a better career. And I sometimes describe this as, for a long time, industry and higher education had this idea that higher ed leaders would have students come in and we'd push them up to better jobs. And that works, and it's useful. But what we need now is an employer-driven scenario where they suck up or they demand. Instead of a push from higher ed, we need a sucking action from employers to demand more skilled workers from community colleges. And I'm telling you that the gold standard in any region in our country that does this well is an employer-driven community that delivers jobs to people who achieve higher education credentials. And frankly, it's just the partnership with higher education and a promise of a job at the end of the curriculum.
Well, you know, it's interesting because the data that we looked at earlier, there's almost 700,000 people in this region that have some college. And, you know, when I was growing up, there was no question that I was going to go to college. My father, a World War II veteran, he aspired for his children to have a better life than he had. It's that 1940s thing that we heard about a minute ago. And so with 700,000 people not having some college, but they never finished. And it might be because of the student loan issue. It might be because of, you know, the debt. It might also be that they just don't see it worth the time or the money. So this is a question for all the panelists. How do you address that? We have these levers that you talked about, Michigan Reconnect, the Detroit Promise, but is that message getting through to that target population of 700,000 people? How do we reach those people and encourage them to see that better path and to seek higher ed or the credential, whether it's a badge or an associate degree? That population is there. What do we do about it? Who would like to respond first? Russ, you're nodding your head, so.
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk about this because you're right. You pointed to something that we at higher education need to do a better job of, which is to broadcast the value of education for one's life and investing their time. And so what we know is, and what I often say is, for a student who comes here and finishes, they can expect to earn almost $12,000 a year more than when they came in. And we have a wide panoply of programs that students can enroll in for that purpose. But what we've seen is we've started to eliminate barriers to access. Through the Detroit Promise, we've eliminated the tuition barrier. For Futures for Frontliners, we've told frontline workers, we're going to invest in you as a state to help you achieve a better life through education. And now with this Michigan Reconnect, what we've said to people 25 or older, we want you back in the education pipeline also. And you're right, the 700,000 in our region that have some college and no degree, I suspect they're working at the place where Detroit Regional Chamber members employ them, at places like Peters and other shops, where those people are there with some college, no degree. They're over 25. Let's go to them. You, CEO, whoever you are, you and me, let's go to your workers, your incumbent workers who are over 25 and say, we will invest in you because the state of Michigan has eliminated the barrier of tuition. Now let's upskill you. Or frankly, if you have a demand and a need for employees that have certain skills, let's focus on the 25-year-olds in your region that have some college, and let's build a curriculum that they can answer those needs for on the skills, and let's promise them a job. And you, as a CEO, tell me, do you need students with over 3.0? Do you need students with over a certain amount of experience? We know that we can drive enrollment and better outcomes if we show them a better future through education. And we know we can do that, but I need employers to help me make that argument.
How do you see this, your role and the CEO council role? Are you ready to step up and tell your employees over 25 that, hey, come on down, let's work together and get you the kinds of credentials that you need?
Yeah, I think you know, Russ makes a great point that this works when this is employer-led, because that's where these people are. And we need to make the case to them that there is value and benefit to upskilling and reskilling and closing off the degree that they started. I'm a particular proponent of recognizing work experience as part of that. So to the extent individuals can get work experience credit, so instead of having 3 years left on a 4-year degree, maybe they have a year and a half or 2 years left. I think that's helpful. I think employers need to be flexible. Somebody's working 45 hours a week or 40 hours a week. Do they have time to go back to school? So maybe they work 35 hours a week and they're allowed 5 hours credit, if you will, to attend a class, every semester or 2. And I think employers who are flexible and enlightened about that are going to attract and retain critical people who will have additional skills. So I guess the last point I would make, I think we spend a lot of time on admission strategy for students. I think we need to focus on exit strategies too. So employers need to do a better job making the case we're going to have a job for you because you have the skills we need, and you're going to earn more money over your lifetime because of it.
David, I want to move to you and see if you have seen, you're looking at big data, you're looking at trends. Have you seen any programs, or do you have any thoughts on what the Chamber or what Peter's CEO, Talent Council might embrace to try and reach that some college population? And what do you think would resonate with that population to try and get them across the finish line?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what's exciting about this conversation is that it is across these sectors. And I think there's growing evidence that, right, to have the impact we're talking about, it has to include higher education ecosystem, the corporate world, and local government and organizations like the Chamber. Where, I've been really kind of interested in these sectoral employment programs, those that provide some of that soft skill training, but then also those hard skills related to guaranteed jobs. And again, you can't do that without having both the corporate sector and higher ed and these nonprofits all working in tandem. I think something that also is interesting about them as well is that it's not just about that job, but putting you in a position where there's room for growth and career advancement. And what the data and research says is that those programs really work, and those folks who are involved in that, who get put in that pipeline, are earning $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 more, a few years after they're involved in these programs. So I think the first step is having these conversations and making sure that we're tracking the impact that we hope we have, and building off of those great examples that we have here in Michigan, but also that we have across the country. And two examples, Year Up and Work Advance, I think are two of those. But it's happening in Michigan, happening in southeastern Michigan. But I think kind of keep building on the progress we're already making and continuing to work across sectors.
So we're getting the 2-minute warning here. So I want to try and wrap things up and just ask each of you, thinking the audience on this call today, we have educators, we have business owners, we have CEOs, we have policy people, and that's just a cross section. So if you look at the data and you look at the conversation we've had today, if you can recommend one action to either an owner or to someone who is on this call for a specific reason, they signed up for a reason. Peter, what would you recommend to the business owners or the CEOs as an action step based on today?
Well, based on today, as I said, it's a wake-up call. We're looking for your engagement. You can reach me on LinkedIn. We want to help you improve your workforce and reduce the cost of your operations, and we can do that through education and cooperation. So get involved.
Okay. Russ, how about you?
Yeah, if you're running a business, you either got employees who are there now who don't have a 2-year degree, and now there's no tuition barrier. So call me. Literally call my office. We'll have a conversation how we can pick the employees that are incumbent to your company right now that deserve some investment, because the tuition barrier is gone. And if you don't have any incumbent workers who fit that message, you clearly have skills needs. Call me for the same question. How do I get my skills needs met through Henry Ford College? I'll partner with you. And all I'm asking for is an opportunity for those individuals to have employment at your institution.
David, what's your mandate?
Yeah, so I'm not going to say to read some boring economics papers, but I will say, right, despite some of the bad trends we're seeing, stay optimistic and think big, right? The resources are out there, right? The network's out there. Think about how you can not just create jobs or create opportunity, but really kind of be an organization or an entity that's helping push economic and upward mobility.
Okay. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for participating today. I wish we had more time. Peter, I wanted to hear more about Kelly's investment in the Kenzie Academy and the idea of badges and certifications, but we've run out of time. So I apologize for that, but great conversation. And now we'll turn it back to the Chamber.
Please welcome Vice President of Education and Talent at the Detroit Regional Chamber, Greg Handel.
Good morning. For the last 2 years, the Chamber has recognized leaders making outstanding contributions to education with our Excellence in Education Award, inspired by Dan Little, former Chancellor of the University of Michigan Dearborn. As a Chamber of Commerce, we felt it was appropriate this year to create a new award, recognizing a business leader making outstanding contribution to education and equity. I am thrilled to announce that we are bestowing our inaugural Business Leadership in Education and Equity Award to Dick Rassel, chairman of But So Long. Over 10 years ago, Dick joined a small group of educators and businesses committed to the goal of working across sectors to increase the number and diversity of people in our region with a meaningful post-secondary education. Early on, Dick accepted the role of co-chair of this collaborative that became known as Detroit Drives Degrees. Dick's constant willingness to reach out and help recruit new partners and his leadership through many long, grueling strategy sessions were instrumental in growing and scaling our efforts. Education reform is often a challenging undertaking, with long periods of hard work and very little reward. But Dick's commitment to the cause of increasing education opportunities for all has always been very personal to him. He has never wavered. He has always answered the call. His passion and leadership have guided our growth from a small informal group with no full-time staff or budget to speak of to a collaborative of over 40 cross-sectional leaders, $1 million a year budget, and a staff of 5 full-time professionals. All of those elements have come together over the last 6 months to produce the Detroit Regional Talent Compact, with 35 leaders and institutions signing on to a detailed strategic plan incorporating numerous national best practices to achieve our attainment and equity goals. Dick also walks the walk, committing But So Long and the Talent Compact to the Talent Compact by developing a corporate tuition support program for non-degreed staff who wish to complete their education, supporting campaigns to encourage FAFSA completion, and expanding mentoring programs. Lastly, Dick's leadership comes in the form of a genuinely warm and caring person, for which I've always been grateful. We're fortunate that Dick was able to record a few words for us.
Good morning. I'm humbled and honored to receive this award, but I must say that most of the credit should go to my fellow lawyers at But So Long and the leadership and staff at the Detroit Regional Chamber. Without their support and their effort, there would be no Detroit Drives Degree initiative. For many years, I have been troubled by the uneven qualities and opportunities for post-secondary education in our region and the damage it was doing to our kids and to our region's future. When the Detroit Regional Chamber presented the opportunity to work on improving educational outcomes and equal access, I jumped at the opportunity because it dovetailed with my own personal interests and the work already being done by the But So Long educational industry team. Along the way, I have worked with many educational leaders, but 2 in particular need to be acknowledged: Dr. Ora Peskovitz and Dr. Dan Little. I am also had the great fortune to work with the great team at the Detroit Regional Chamber: Sandy Barua, Greg Handel, and Melanie D'Evelyn. Detroit Drives Degrees deserves the business community's support. Achieving 60% post-secondary degree attainment by 2030 will position our region to go forward in a unified way and to be competitive with the rest of the world. I am personally committed to working on achieving its goals. Thank you again for this award.
Well, again, Dick, thank you for your leadership. It's my pleasure to close out our event today by thanking all of you for participating and thanking our sponsor who make events like this possible. So thank you again to Kelly, the Kresge Foundation, our funding partner, and the others. As a reminder, the full State of Education report is available at detroitchamber.com.soe. We welcome your feedback on today's event through the survey, which will be emailed to you within the next 24 hours. I invite you to view our final sponsorship video and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
We connect people to the work they want. We connect companies to the people they need. But it's bigger than that, because when we connect people to work, we change their lives. We provide the foundation for people to create their own future, to discover what's next for themselves, their families, and their communities. We fuel growth, help build better futures, and change the way the world works.